Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, Jack Borman from the Locked On Wolves podcast joins the show. We'll talk about the biggest takeaways between game 1 and 2 and why Jack feels, and I agree, overwhelmingly optimistic headed into game 3 and beyond. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend and happy Timberwolves game day. The Wolves host the Lakers tonight for game 3, a pivotal game 3. And we're going to have Jack Borman from the Locked On Wolves postcast on the show here today. And we're going to spend the show talking about key takeaways from the first 2 games. Jack was in LA at crypto.com arena, and he is going to have some opinions on the Lakers crowd. He's going to talk a little bit about his major takeaways and also what to look for in game 3. We'll talk about why we're both pretty optimistic moving forward in the series. All right, let's get into it. Without further ado, my conversation with Jack Borman. All right, as promised, Jack Borman's here to talk all things Wolves-Lakers, of course, getting ready for game 3 tonight. Jack was in LA for games 1 and 2, got to see a phenomenal 22-point win in game 1 and a less exciting kind of offensive, I wouldn't call it a rock fight. It was more fun than a typical, more fun than like Warriors-Rockets rock fight game 1, right? Like it's at least an entertaining game 2 in my mind. How was the crowd in LA? What was that like compared to what you're used to seeing at Target Center?
Yeah, it was definitely more tame than what you're used to seeing at Target Center. I think it was, it was interesting because every single time Luka touched the ball, there were palpable oohs and ahs, and especially when Rudy Gobert was involved. But yeah, I think they just kind of went crazy whenever Luka did anything, and it was just a lot tamer whenever anyone else did anything, which is pretty crazy for a team that also has LeBron James on it. But yeah, it's certainly, I mean, crypto.com arena is a little bit more spread out too. There's a little bit more space in between every seat. There's a little bit more distance between some of the seats in the court. So I think that certainly factors into it. Whereas in Target Center, you're just on top of the court and it's a lot more vertical than horizontal. So yeah, I definitely think the Target Center will be louder than what LA was for games 1 and 2.
Yeah, I feel like there's the whole, and it's different. Like I've never been to Madison Square Garden for a Knicks game, but like same, kind of Showtime feel. The lighting's different in some of those arenas, but like at the same time, because of that Showtime feel, it feels like the Lakers crowd is not, it's not the same as a Knicks crowd even, right? Like and that's
for sure. Yeah, I've been to MSG for a Knicks game, and granted the Knicks got blown out in the game that I did go to, but yeah, certainly there's more energy in the New York crowd. I think it's still the New York crowd is a little bit more of a blue collar crowd that are there for the love of the game rather than for a social event type of thing, for sure. And don't get me wrong, like there's still those types of Lakers fans that were there at that game, but it definitely wasn't as much of a, at Minnesota, it feels like almost everybody's going to be there because they want to just be super loud and rowdy the whole entire time.
Yeah, it's definitely an East Coast, West Coast thing. And then, of course, everybody in the Midwest is, it's like a Wolves crowd is more like say a Thunder crowd, right? Like where it's everybody's there because they're huge Timberwolves fans and they're ready for playoff basketball. Yeah. So,
exactly.
Okay. We're back at Target Center for I guess, tonight's game. This is Friday's show, and you'll be there for game 3. I spent some time in the last couple of days talking about, actually Thursday's show was kind of like glass half full, reasons for optimism moving forward. And I think that's for the most part, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but kind of the tenor of the show today is like, hey, it might be 1-1 and we can do the whole like the kind of tired cliche of, well, they left with a split and that's what they wanted. But I think it's more than that, right? Like the game they won, they completely ran the Lakers off the floor. The game they lost, they were really in the game. And if we could tick down the list, and I did this on yesterday's show, of all the things that went wrong that typically don't go so drastically wrong for the Wolves, and they easily could have won that game, even though they ended up losing by 9 and only scored 85 points. But I guess where I'd want to start is your biggest overall takeaway from 2 drastically different games. Your biggest takeaway from the 2 games in LA, and was there anything that stood out to you as surprising or maybe unexpected over the course of the first 2 games?
Yeah, I just think that, it's hard to kind of disassociate the experience of watching the Timberwolves against the Mavericks last year in this version of the Lakers with Luka Doncic on it. But I think my biggest overall takeaway is that they held the Lakers to 94 and 95 points in those two games. And that, for the Wolves, I mean, if you would have told me before the series, the last time that we recorded, that if the Wolves had held the Lakers to that in the first two games, I would think that it's 2-0. But yeah, I think, the Wolves have to be feeling really good, knowing that if the game is going to be played on similar terms that it has been played on through the first two games, that they have they should win the series. I think the most telling thing for me being in LA that I don't know came through on on the broadcast is like whenever Luka did not have the ball or LeBron did not have the ball in offense, those guys were keeled over and those guys were absolutely exhausted, especially in the fourth quarter. Like if you look at how many points the Lakers scored in each quarter over those two games, it was just like a pretty constant, negative slope there. And I think that, yeah, just the style of play, how physical the Wolves were defensively, how well they rebounded on the offense or on the defensive glass for the majority of the of the series, and then also too the way that they won in transition, right? It was something that I was not necessarily expecting, and the Timberwolves can win on the offensive glass, in the aggregate, can win in transition in the aggregate. I think they're going to be pretty good, and that's even really before getting even a B+ game from Anthony Edwards in either of these first two games. I don't know if you've been giving out player grades, if you would give anything that would rise to the level of a B+ for Ant, but I still think that he's got some hills to climb, and we'll get into that. But yeah, I just think overall my biggest takeaway is that you should feel great about the Wolves' chances to win this series because they played as bad as they possibly could have played. Their bench played as bad as they could have played in game two. And they still had more bench points than the Lakers, and they only lost by 9 points despite making a season low 5 threes. So,
yeah, and I would say, and I said this on Thursday's show, outside of Austin Reeves not playing well, and I know he had some good moments in game two, but overall, like I think we would say Austin Reeves has been at best a C in the series so far if we wanted to give him a grade. So that would be the only one for the Lakers where like everything else from what the Lakers have done, like I don't know, like Luka's been really good in both games for the most part. LeBron, like, he hasn't been great, but I don't know, like, what are we looking for in terms of best case for LeBron as a scorer if you're a Lakers fan? So I would say there's more of those, like, this was unusually bad for the Wolves, type of bullet points than you would say for the Lakers. You mentioned transition, and one of the things I talked about leading into the series, and I believe we covered last week when we previewed it, is the Wolves don't run a ton in transition. In fact, they play at a slower pace on the regular season as a whole. Obviously, there's a pre and post Luka version of the Lakers, but as a whole, the Wolves ran even less than the Lakers. But the Wolves are better when they do run, and they're more opportunistic running off of turnovers. And the Lakers played so much ISO ball in game two, there just weren't that many opportunities for the Wolves to get steals and go the other way in transition. But I think if they can create some of those opportunities for themselves by maybe selectively doubling or just being a little more aggressive defensively, then yeah, that there's some opportunity for easy buckets there, for sure. And I guess the other thing that stands out from the first couple games, that I guess maybe one of the only things that was the same other than the Lakers scoring 95 or less points, was the Wolves got off to a really slow start in both games in the first quarter. I'm a little worried about that simply because it was on the road, and we're kind of used to the Wolves getting off to slow starts at home this season, and to the point where like Chris Finch was answering questions, and they were asking themselves questions about, like, is our routine weird when we're at home? Like, do guys need to do something different with their home life to be ready to go? Like things like that mid-season, which seems kind of crazy, but like, is there anything other than just like these guys got to be ready to go, or is there anything that stood out to you as how or why the Wolves were getting off to such bad starts in the first quarter?
Yeah, I think one thing that stands out to me is that if you look at you look at game one for the Lakers, right? Luka just came out, shot out of a cannon in game one and immediately just completely took over the game, and just was shooting a bunch and kind of said, I'm going to do this myself. And I think probably had like 15 of the Lakers' first 20 points or something like that in game one. And a lot of them were pretty loud baskets too. And then I think in game two, obviously LeBron and Austin Reeves got off to a really slow start. Neither of them scored in game one on the first quarter. And so JJ ran a lot more things through LeBron and Austin Reeves and had those guys kind of bring the floor up and initiate actions and be kind of the first guy touching the ball when an action would start after the initiator would get rid of it. And so I think that was really important for the Lakers too, that it was just making sure that their best players were very involved in the game right away. And they did so in different ways in game one and in game two, but they were both, equally successful. And Luka ended up still outscoring the Timberwolves in the first quarter of game two. But, Anthony Edwards took one shot in the first 4 minutes of game two and wasn't really involved very much early on in game one either. Him and Randle both had those bad turnovers that they threw into the second or third row and those jump skip passes across the arc. And so I think for the Wolves, I think part of it has been a tone that's been set by Anthony Edwards. I think Chris Finch kind of understands that Ant likes to kind of feel these games out and start a little bit slower in the first quarter and then really turn his aggression up a level in the second and third and fourth quarters. And I think that's fine in a vacuum if you're not down 15 in the first quarter. But I think when you're down double digits in the first quarter, it can just be really hard to rely on that switch getting flipped. So I think for the Wolves, it's trying to find ways to get Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle involved early in the game that aren't isolations. Because I think for those two guys, when they isolate, especially when they don't get into the paint off those isolations, the shot selection ends up being pretty poor. So I think it would be, for me, trying to run some off-ball actions where Ant starts off the ball, is getting the ball kind of moving towards the basket, or maybe for Julius trying to get him isolated and cleared out post-up situations where he's been pretty effective, especially against smalls in this series, is something that they'll have the opportunity to do. So that's something that I'd like to see at least kind of remedy that from just playing through your stars in a little bit more of an efficient way.
Yeah, and that's something we've seen Chris Finch do in the past. Like, every team tries to starts the game with a couple of set plays or whatever, and we saw him do that all the time last year with Karl-Anthony Towns to try and get him catch and shoot opportunities to get him going. If Cat saw that first one go through, it was typically going to be a more aggressive, a good offensive game for him. We've seen them do that with Julius, but it usually ends up being an isolation type play. That's where he's most effective, or at least where he's most frequently effective on offense. But yes, catch it. We saw this with Ant. Actually, there were a couple of plays once Ant got going, the Wolves started to run some plays to try and get him catch and shoot opportunities. And because the Lakers were loading up, it was never really a clean look. And actually, we are going to talk about that. We're going to talk a lot about the Lakers' defensive plan on Ant and how the Wolves can respond. We'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money, but instead you start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you'll realize how much money you'll spend on whatever it is that you don't think you're spending money on, but you are. For me, it was food delivery. Easy to just order food delivery on a Friday, Saturday night. It adds up. But now you can budget smarter and save more with the all-in convenience of Monarch Money. Plus, you can also manage money with your partner, and it's way smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right, so the way the Lakers defend Anthony Edwards, I want to spend a little bit of time on that, because I think anytime that a player post-game makes a comment to the effect of, I was a little confused, or however he said it, I'm paraphrasing, but it was a little confusing the way they were playing me. It was basically a zone, right? We've seen teams put two on the ball all the time with Ant. He was, I think, number one in the league in terms of being doubled on the perimeter, at least out of pick and roll opportunities, just being blitzed. And his points per possession weren't great. I think we talked about this last week. The Lakers don't like to double, and they didn't actually do a ton of it in game one. And Ant didn't shoot great. He scored 22 points on 22 shots in game one, but he had 9 assists and only 1 turnover, and he missed a bunch of layups and shots he normally makes. So I think overall his decision-making in game one was very good. Game two, it was a bit spottier, and he had some big moments. Of course, the massive dunk over Jackson Hayes, and he had positive moments throughout the game. But the Lakers really I think what it looked like to me is they really turned up their coverage from game one, and they were more aggressively playing gaps and shading their offense, or excuse me, their defense heavily toward the strong side of the floor when Anthony Edwards had the ball. It wasn't, they occasionally blitzed him, but it wasn't really a true blitz. I mean, what did you see from the Lakers coverage? And also, like, what sort of adjustment does that, is it just simply playing faster, or what kind of adjustment does Ant and the Timberwolves make to respond to what the Lakers are doing defensively?
Yeah, I thought in game one, the Timberwolves did a much better job of moving the ball quicker around the perimeter to create open shots. And I think the Wolves didn't do that as much in game two. And I think they just didn't have a whole lot of rhythm in the first part of the quarter, in the first part of the first quarter offensively. And that just kind of trickled really for the entire rest of the game. And I just think that, the Wolves would be smart to try to start Ant off the ball a little bit more and force the Lakers defense to move, because that Lakers defense is going to move more when Ant isn't involved. I mean, JJ Redick spoke pregame in game two and said that a lot of, the Timberwolves, a lot of their breakdowns defensively had nothing to do with what he called their Ant defense, obviously signaling that they have certain concepts in place specifically to stop Ant, implying that they're playing a different style of defense, either when Ant's not on the floor or when Ant, isn't the one initiating the action. And so I think for me, what I would like to see more of is what they did really in the second quarter and parts of the third quarter, where they set a lot more flare screens for Ant. So when, someone, most often it's Rudy, sets a screen for Ant above the break, and Ant kind of floats over the top of it, kind of moving along the top of the arc, and then the ball is thrown over the top of the screen. And then from there, they would, run a DHL with Nikhil, or Rudy would come and then set another screen, an on-ball screen, and then Ant was just kind of able to have a little bit more space, whether it was to dance with the ball or get a straight line drive going, or kind of sprint around the edge of the defense and then get inside to the paint. And so I think the more that the Timberwolves can make the Lakers defense move and have to think, I think that's going to be better. So I think you're going to see more off-ball screens from Chris Finch. I think, especially if guys like Dante and Nas are playing, those guys are generally pretty good at cutting from the slots to break down the backside of the defense to open up corner 3-point shots, which was something we saw a decent amount of in game one. So I just think there needs to be more off the ball movement to make the back end of the Lakers defense have to think and have to work a little bit harder. And when that happens, that's when you tend to see the defensive letdowns and those types of things. But another part of it too, for me, is like, I thought Luka and LeBron were much more attentive off the ball, which is certainly helpful. So, if those two guys are locked in for the Lakers and actually, paying attention and doing what they need to do from a game plan perspective, that definitely helps.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. Like, that's the other thing. The other adjustment the Lakers made, even while their defense shifted a little, they also just simply played harder in game two, which was a big deal defensively. Obviously, the Wolves scored just 85 points versus, 120-ish or whatever they scored in game one. So that was certainly a big part of it too. And your point about working Ant off the ball, I feel like we've gone through phases this year of kind of like clamoring for more of that, as like, look, this dude, like, so far, I just pulled the NBA.com stats, and so far in the playoffs, Ant's 4 for 4 on catch and shoot 3-point opportunities across 2 games. Obviously, it's only 4 shots, but he's made all of them. And in the regular season, yes, Ant's great off the dribble shooting threes, one of the best in the league. But he's over 42% shooting catch and shoot threes. So he's still a phenomenal catch and shoot 3-point shooter. And I just think it, like, and there, I guess we could go back. This is more of an offseason conversation, but then you go back to, well, who's creating, if Ant's off the ball, and that's where the Wolves, that's the hope long-term. That's a Rob Dillingham, right? Like, that's somebody like that who can add that additional threat. But somebody like Nikhil has shown that he, say that again. Oh, Kevin Durant. Yeah. Kevin Durant. Or Kevin Durant. But to have that other person that's initiated, and then Ant can be like, Ant ultimately ends up with the ball in his hands. We've talked about this before, when Ant initiates possessions, where if he gets off the ball early, he's going to get it back. And we've seen that work certainly throughout the year at times, but even already a little bit in the Lakers series, where if he gets rid of the ball early, the ball's going to find him again. Like, just naturally, he's going to get the ball back and be able to attack as a second side attack, or he's, the defense is going to be in rotation. And when it's the Lakers, if they end up generating some sort of switch, or if the Lakers are scrambling because they have to cut off somebody else's drive, whoever ends up on Ant isn't going to be able to stop him one-on-one, which is kind of the point in the first place. So I just think it is a combination of what you said, and then also Ant being a quick decision maker. Game one, I thought Ant was almost perfect with his decision making in terms of when to drive, when to attack a mismatch, when to let it fly, when to get to the rim. And then game two, it seemed like everything was a half beat slow. And I don't think Ant was the only culprit. I think we saw that from almost anyone with the ball in their hands. It's like they were just waiting for the game to come to them. And I think being more aggressive and playing faster against a less athletic team makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also, it slows the game down a little bit when the Lakers are switching everything. Like when you're switching everything and you're playing slow to begin with, then I think it really starts to come unhinged a little bit for the Wolves. Because obviously, like a team that can switch everything, that's going to be the highest ceiling for an NBA defense, no question about it. If you've got guys that can all switch and all guard in space and all, defend the post, do everything that you need to do. But yeah, I just think that you've got the kind of impetus for everything, flowing downstream effectively for the Wolves offensively is just the decisiveness and the pace. And I think they had that in game one and they didn't in game two. And it certainly helped in game one that they were able to get out and run a bunch off of turnovers and off of misses. And I think that that's something that they'll do as well. Like I think Chris Finch is kind of trying to, create some of that by nature with playing a lot more of the Jaden, Julius, and Nas front court that we saw. And those lineups have played 23 minutes in the first two games and are, have an 120 offensive rating, 84 defensive rating, about a 36 net rating. So, plus 36 net rating, which is obviously great. But also what's interesting is Mike Conley has played a lot with that group as well. And so, Mike's usage is it's interesting to me considering that he's been out there a lot when Rudy hasn't been out there, is something that's been interesting, especially, and it'd make more sense if he was playing when Ant was out there and Rudy wasn't out there, as just like a guy that can come and set small screens, force switches, things like that we saw a little bit of in game one. But I just think his role is going to be something that's interesting to watch as we kind of press forward, especially as it relates to some of the Wolves' offensive adjustments. Because like some of Ant's struggles with defenses like this was the whole reason why Dante got into the starting lineup to begin with. Because if you're going to have guys aggressively playing in the gaps, having a guy that can just shoot the leather off the ball one pass away took away some of that. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out moving forward.
Yeah, I want to close today by talking a little bit about potential game three adjustments, and we've alluded to some of those, but I specifically do want to talk about Conley, the lineup. Maybe is there a starting lineup adjustment, or is it just more of a tweak along the way? So we'll get into that next. Real quick, I had looked up that Ant was 4 of 4 on catch and shoot threes in the playoffs. So far, he's 3 of 19 on pull-up threes in the playoffs over 2 games, of course. So nope, sorry. 2 of 13. Read the wrong column. 3 of 19 on field goals, pull up. 2 of 13 on 3-pointers. That's 15% across 2 games on pull-up threes. He's 4 for 4 on catch and shoot. And for the season, he was over 42% catch and shoot. He's 38.5% on pull-up threes, which is still a crazy number at that volume. He shot 600 pull-up threes this year. He made 38.5% of them, which is nuts. But just like anyone else in the league, he's going to be a better catch and shoot 3-point shooter, which is just another reason to run more off-ball actions for him. All right, we're going to close by talking about potential game 3 adjustments. Maybe, what do the Lakers do to adjust? We'll do all that here next. All right, game 3 coming up tonight. We've seen the Lakers struggle to score. We've seen them adjust their defense to try and slow down Anthony Edwards to some success in game 2. On the Wolves side, we haven't seen any major rotation changes except for, and this was mostly due to foul trouble, TJ Shannon playing 7 rotation minutes, I think all in the first half of game 2, and he played really well. I think one of the clear things that stands out across the first 2 games, there's a couple in terms of the Wolves' potential rotation adjustments. One for me is Mike Conley, who shot the ball well in game 1, was 0 for 5 from the field in game 2, and was targeted defensively in both games. I thought he held his own when he was guarding Rui Hachimura, but you're still the Lakers are doing what they can to manipulate that as much as they can. And also, and I don't know that this necessarily means anything about a rotation change, but Rudy has done nothing scoring-wise against the team that he should have opportunities to score on lobs. I don't know that means anything to the rotation, but those 2 things stand out to me in terms of guys who you're not getting offensive production from, and you need to get something. You're not going to get 20 plus from Rudy or from Mike Conley, but you got to get something from those guys. Do you expect any sort of a rotation tweak from Chris Finch be it the starting lineup or just kind of, over the course of the game, the minutes get shuffled a little bit.
Yeah, I think that, we could see some lineup tweaks, but I think like the biggest thing for me is offensively, like really on both ends of the floor, the Wolves have been really bad with Dante DiVincenzo on the floor. And so, it's not quite as clear to me that the defense is going to be better than, like the whole hunting Mike thing. I mean, honestly, I've thought that how much isolation basketball the Lakers have played has honestly helped the Timberwolves and has taken some of the rhythm out of their offense, and that they haven't really been able to target certain guys as efficiently, in the flow of things as well as, we might think. So that's something that, I'm curious more so how it'll play on the offensive end of the floor than the defensive end of the floor. But yeah, I think, when you look at Mike, I mean, Mike played for like 7 minutes in that first quarter of game one. And then he in the first quarter and the third quarter came out at the 8-minute mark for Dante. Like they were very quick hooks. And I think that if that's going to continue to happen, like, do you really want to start him? If you're just going to take him out after 4 quick minutes and the starting lineup was really bad in the first quarter of both games. I mean, the starting lineup was awesome in the third quarter of game 3, or excuse me, the third quarter of game 1, but like, I just don't know. And so I think that'll be interesting because Nickeil also really has not been great, especially in the offensive end of the floor. I think he's been pretty good defensively for sure, but like, I'd honestly be more curious to see if TJ continues to play, because the Wolves obviously need more pace and more just fast break opportunities. And with him just being that one-man fast break, who is also, for my money, I think the most underrated thing about TJ Shannon is that his rebounding, especially in contested rebounding situations, is awesome. And so the more, be able to add another rebounder out there, I think would be interesting. And if you continued to have that, Jaden, Nas, and Julius front court, maybe you maybe you think you can get away with putting TJ out there instead of Nickeil defensively, where I don't think TJ is going to be a liability defensively at all. And then maybe you have either Ant or Dante in there as kind of the main, guy that can add some floor spacing to that group and just be able to fly up the court and add some, add a different dimension to maybe, something that we haven't seen from the Timberwolves quite yet. But look, I think, Chris Finch is a creature of habit, and I don't think that he's going to be, willing to pivot off of Mike as quickly. But then again, like he's pivoted off of Rudy somewhat quickly in some of these moments too. Yeah. So I think, he has kind of challenged the status quo a little bit in that regard. So I think, for me, the two biggest questions are if Mike is going to play less, is he going to go to Dante more or Nickeil more? I would think he's going to go to Nickeil more. Whether that's right or wrong, that's just what I think he'll do. And then, is TJ going to continue to play? And I think you can make an argument that, if Jaden's not providing you what you need on the offensive end of the floor, or he has a performance like he did in game 2, that maybe you are more willing to just like play TJ for 4 or 5 minutes that Jaden would be playing, or in the situation where Nickeil would be playing, or something like that. So, I think honestly, just the biggest adjustment is to just like make jump shots. It's less of a rotational thing. It's more of just like when you shoot 8 of, what they shoot on jumpers in game 2, 8 of 38, 21% on jump shots. It's all those rotation tweaks are kind of moot.
Yeah, no, agreed 100%. And all the guys you're talking about, they're all plus 3-point shooters. So like, who's going to make, like, they're not all going to shoot as badly as they did in game 2. And I talked about this yesterday. They're also probably not all going to shoot as good as they did in game 1. But like, if the reality is somewhere in between, the Wolves probably win game 2 if they just shoot normally from outside the arc in that game. They had it would have been at least a very, one possession game down the stretch. Like, Nickeil is a better 3-point shooter than he's been in this series. So is Dante. And I think you're probably right. If the question is between those two guys, between Alexander Walker and DiVincenzo, Nickeil has been better defensively, and they both struggled offensively. Now, the upside of Dante is better. We know he can score the ball. If you're really struggling with offense, you want somebody like DiVincenzo out there, who I think is going to be again, the upside, the ceiling of what he can do on offense is better. But Nickeil's length and his, DiVincenzo's a fine defender, but Nickeil's better. And so I think, and the familiarity factor, and Finch obviously is a big Alexander Walker fan. So I think if all things are equal, we see a little bit more of Na than we do of Dante. And to your TJ Shannon point, yeah, I mean, he's a better rebounder than than everybody we just listed. Like he's a overall pound for pound. I think he's every bit as good of a rebounder as DiVincenzo. He's better than Alexander Walker. He gives you more on the glass than obviously Mike Conley. So I think, and also his size, like the combination of him being able to be a switchable defender, be a versatile defender, and play at a speed. We talked briefly toward the beginning of the show today about transition opportunities, and there were a ton of those in game one. There were a lot less in game two. You can run on this Lakers team, and TJ Shannon is the sort of, like, there was one possession, I think, where he did that and he just missed. I think he scored on one and just missed a layup on the other, but it was a good take. Just kind of wreak havoc, create chaos. I don't think this is a Jalen Clark series. I think the size of TJ Shannon is more helpful. And the offensive upside of TJ Shannon is more helpful. Jalen Clark could have an opportunity if they advance and play like the Clippers or somebody like that. Or I guess, I don't remember who's on their side of the bracket, Houston, whoever's in the second round, if the Wolves were to advance, that could be more of a Jalen Clark series. I think TJ Shannon makes sense as an 8th or 9th guy in this series. And I agree with you. I don't know that they make a starting lineup change for game 3. If they lose game 3, maybe we see Dante in the starting lineup in game 4. Maybe that's Finch's kind of break glass in case of emergency sort of tweak.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think in game 4, they are I honestly kind of look at game 4 as like the Timberwolves starting with a 10-0 lead, because, in talking to some of the, being in the media room in LA, talking to some of the Lakers beat guys, like, one of them described LeBron to me as like a car that, in the winter time, like you've got to start the car 10 minutes before you go. Otherwise, it's just not going to run as efficiently. And sometimes it's just kind of harder to have a smooth ride and kind of find a rhythm when you're driving in the winter because of how cold it is. It's hard to start. And that's kind of how he described LeBron nowadays. And that, he said like game 3 to game 4 is going to be really tough because, as much as we all love LeBron, he's 40 years old. And the same can kind of be said for Mike, right? And that he's, 37, 38 years old. And that, maybe that's that, that 36-hour break between game 3 and game 4 might be kind of the bridge that Chris Finch crosses to arrive at, okay, maybe now we make this change. And I think because of the Lakers only playing 6 guys essentially in the rotation, that, the Wolves might be able to tinker and just say, you know what, you guys just go play really hard for 3-4 minutes, then we'll make a change and get someone else out. Or maybe they're they have a longer rotation in game 4, knowing that like, hey, we just got to run these guys into the ground, because the style of play that we're playing and this game is, the series is being fought on is, a lot more sustainable for the Timberwolves because they have 8-9 guys that they feel confident in playing. Whereas the Lakers, I think JJ has made it very clear that he does not trust, he does not really trust Jordan Goodwin or Jackson Hayes. And so that'll be kind of interesting for me from a rotation perspective as well, just because I just don't think the Lakers have a whole lot of other things to throw at the Wolves, but the Wolves do have some other looks they can get to if they want.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that was one that I think a lot of people were talking about after game 1 is the Wolves can play a lot of different ways. They have a lot more depth. They have a lot more guys they can trust compared to what Redick has at his disposal with the Lakers. And then the other point you made about Friday to Sunday, I mean, yeah, it's a late Friday tip and it's a 2:30 matinee on Sunday. So that's a huge advantage for Minnesota. It almost makes game 3, I don't say more important. It's obviously pivotal, but like if you win game 3, the Wolves have a really good chance at running the Lakers out of the gym on Sunday. And if you go up 3-1, headed back to LA, you love your chances to close this thing out quickly. So take care of business. It's a playoff series, but like win on Friday night and you're
well, yeah. I mean, you want to look at it like team series in 1-1, it is about 50% win percentage, whichever team wins, and then the winner of game 3, it jumps to 80%. But I'd imagine that that's probably even higher if you're a team that didn't have home court advantage coming into it. And now it's like you already had home court advantage, you stole it. And now you're coming back and you're up 2-1. So that jumps to 80. But does that 80 really feel more like 90 considering that bridge that we talked about between 3 and 4? So look, I think for the Wolves, it's just about maintaining that desperation, right? Like they knew that the Lakers were going to come out and play the way they did at the start of game 2. Finch talked about it pregame, especially, the referee part of it. Like, I don't buy into that as much because the Wolves did shoot more free throws. They did play more physical. They did win the final 40 minutes of the game. They did play great defense, but like they didn't manage the emotional aspect of that very well. And so I think that'll be important too right away in game 3, independent of who's officiating the game. Like we know by a bunch of different metrics, like which refs are going to call more fouls, which ones aren't. And so I think just putting both those things aside, just playing really hard, staying together, and keeping composure will be the most important thing.
All right. We'll have the postcast Friday night, which actually I believe I'm hosting. So I'll see you tonight on the postcast, Jack. Following game 3, of course, we go live after every Wolves game over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. And then the audio from that live show will be here at the Locked On Wolves audio feed. So be sure to check that out live. If you can't catch it, check it out on the Locked On Wolves feed. Appreciate you coming on, Jack. And we'll talk to you tonight.
Sounds great.
All right, there you have it. Jack Borman of the Locked On Wolves postcast. Catch both of us live tonight at Locked On Sports Minnesota immediately following Wolves Lakers. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.